There's this guy I know who made $300,000 a year at 42. Big tech job, stock options, the whole thing. He drove a $70,000 SUV, lived in a house with a $4,000 monthly mortgage, and every summer, his family took these elaborate vacations to Europe. On paper, he was crushing it. Then his company did layoffs. He had 8 weeks of severance and exactly $2,100 in his checking account. Within 4 months, he'd burned through his retirement accounts just to keep the house. By month 6, he was taking contract work at half his old salary because he literally couldn't afford to be picky. Here's the thing. That collapse wasn't caused by the layoff. It was caused by decisions he made 3 years earlier when he bought the house and the car and built a life that required every single dollar he made. The layoff just exposed what was already true. He had income, but he had no margin. And that gap, that's what your 40s are actually about. I'm Tom. I run a business. I've been around enough accountants and lawyers and quietly wealthy people to know that most financial advice you get is designed to sell you something, not to actually make you comfortable. And what I've learned is this: your 40s don't determine if you'll be rich. They determine if you'll be calm. And most people walk right past that fork in the road without even noticing it's there. Here's what I mean. In your 20s and 30s, you have this invisible cushion called time. You can make bad decisions and recover from them because compound interest and career momentum are still on your side. But in your 40s, the math changes. Not because it's too late. It's absolutely not. But because every decision you make now gets multiplied forward into your 50s and 60s with less time to course correct. You're standing at a split in the path. One direction leads to a future where you have options. The other leads to a future where you have obligations. And the insane part is that the difference between these two paths usually isn't income. It's overhead. By the way, I built a free early retirement calculator because most online ones are mathematically wrong. It uses BlackRock and Vanguard logic to expose the weak points in your plan. And I only ask for your email to send the report so I don't store any of your financial data. Link in the description. So let me explain how this actually works. Think of your financial life as 2 buckets. One bucket is your income, the other is your fixed costs. The space between those 2 buckets, that's your margin. And margin is the single most valuable asset you can have in your 40s. Not your house equity, not your 401k balance, margin. Because margin is what gives you options. It's what lets you say no to things that drain you and yes to things that grow you. It's what keeps your brain out of survival mode so you can actually think strategically instead of just firefighting every month. Now here's the first thing that makes your 40s different. The decisions you make about fixed costs in this decade aren't temporary anymore. They're structural. When you're 32 and you buy a car with a 6-year loan, okay, you'll pay it off by 38 and you can reset. But when you're 43 and you take out a 30-year mortgage at the top of what you can afford, you just locked in that payment until you're 73. You didn't just commit next year's cash flow. You committed the next 3 decades. And that decision will determine whether you enter your 60s with breathing room or with your back against the wall. Let me give you a story. There's this couple, mid-40s, both working, good jobs. They had a house they bought for $350,000 back in 2012. Modest place, fine neighborhood, payment was maybe $1,800 a month. Then in 2021, with rates near zero and home prices going insane, they did what everyone said was smart. They sold that house for $600,000 and upgraded, bought a place for $850,000. Suddenly their payment went from $1,800 to $4,200 a month. Same couple, same jobs. But now 50% of their take-home income was going to housing. And here's the kicker. They didn't feel richer. They felt trapped because every single month, that $4,200 had to go out the door before anything else could happen. Emergency fund? Can't build it. Extra retirement contributions? Not this year. Career flexibility? Forget it. They couldn't afford to take a pay cut for a better opportunity because the house required both incomes at their current levels just to stay afloat. They traded a small amount of additional living space for an enormous amount of financial stress. And that stress doesn't show up on Instagram. It shows up at 3 in the morning when you can't sleep because you're doing math in your head. This is where it gets really interesting. The Federal Reserve does this survey every year asking Americans about their financial well-being. And what jumps out is that about half of Americans say they're living paycheck to paycheck. You might think, okay, that's low-income households. But it's not. Bank of America looked at their own data and found that even high-income households report this same feeling. People making 6 figures saying they have no margin. And the reason is simple. Lifestyle creep. You get a raise, and within 6 months, your fixed costs have risen to match. Your car gets nicer, your house gets bigger, your subscriptions multiply, and suddenly you're making more money than ever, but feeling more financially stuck than ever. Let me put some numbers on this. The average new car payment in the United States right now is about $750 a month, according to Experian. If you're financing used, it's around $530. Most households have 2 cars. So let's say you're paying $1,400 a month just in car payments. Over 6 years, that's over $100,000 in payments alone. Now, imagine instead of those 2 financed cars, you bought reliable used vehicles outright for maybe $25,000 total. Suddenly, you've got that $1,400 a month back. If you invested that difference, even at a conservative 7% real return after inflation, in 10 years, you'd have over $100,000. That's one decision. Just cars. And it completely changes the trajectory of your 40s. Here's the thing people miss. Stress isn't caused by not having enough money. It's caused by exposure, by having too little buffer between you and the next financial disruption. And in your 40s, you're at peak exposure. You've got kids and expensive activities. You've got aging parents who might need help. You've got a mortgage. You've got career pressure. You've got college looming. If you've built a life where your fixed costs eat up 80% of your income, you're one bad month away from crisis. And your brain knows it. Even if you're not consciously stressed, your nervous system is running hot all the time, scanning for threats, waiting for the other shoe to drop. There's this concept in behavioral economics called scarcity mindset. Researchers found that when people feel like they don't have enough, whether it's money or time or anything else, their brains start operating differently. They develop what's called tunneling. This intense focus on immediate problems that actually makes it harder to think about long-term strategy. It's like cognitive bandwidth gets consumed by the stress, leaving fewer resources for everything else. And here's what's wild. This effect isn't just about being objectively poor. It's about the feeling of scarcity, which means someone making $150,000 a year, but spending $145,000 experiences the same cognitive narrowing as someone making $40,000. The brain doesn't care about the absolute numbers. It cares about the gap. Think about what this does to your decision making. When you're in scarcity mode, you make worse choices. You take the first job offer instead of negotiating. You avoid necessary but uncomfortable conversations with your boss because you can't risk any disruption. You stay in situations that are slowly killing you because you literally can't afford the short-term chaos of change. This is the paradox of high income without margin. You make more money, but you have less freedom. Because freedom isn't about how much you make. It's about how much you keep and how little you're obligated to spend. Now you might be thinking, okay, but I've got responsibilities. I've got kids. I can't just drive a beater and live in a tiny apartment. And look, I'm not saying you should. What I'm saying is that the 40-something version of you needs to ask a different question than the 30-something version did. The question isn't, what can I afford? The question is, what does this decision cost me in terms of future optionality? Every time you increase your fixed costs, you're trading future flexibility for current consumption. And in your 40s, that trade has permanent consequences. Let me give you another story. I know a guy who at 45 was making about $90,000 a year. Not spectacular, but solid. He drove a 10-year-old Honda. He lived in a neighborhood that was fine, but not fancy. His mortgage was $1,200 a month. And because his fixed costs were so low, he was saving almost 30% of his take-home. By 50, he had built up enough margin that when his company started going in a direction he didn't believe in, he could just walk away. Took 6 months off, retrained in a new field, came back at 51, making less than before, but way happier. And he could afford to do that because his life didn't require $90,000 a year to function. It required maybe $55,000. That gap between what he made and what he needed, that was freedom. That was the margin that let him make a decision based on what he wanted instead of what he was trapped into. Compare that to someone making twice as much but spending all of it. That person has income, but they don't have leverage. They're a high-paid prisoner. And the thing is, most of the spending that creates that prison isn't even making them happier. It's just what everyone else is doing. It's the keeping up game. And in your 40s, if you're still playing that game, you're gonna lose. Because the finish line keeps moving and the cost of playing keeps going up. Here's another pattern I've noticed. The people who feel most calm in their 50s aren't the ones who made the most money in their 40s. They're the ones who built the most margin. Because margin is what converts money from just a number in an account into actual life options. With margin, you can take a career risk. You can say no to a client who treats you badly. You can help your kids without wrecking your own finances. You can handle an emergency without spiraling. Margin is psychological oxygen. And most people in their 40s are suffocating themselves with fixed costs and calling it success. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. Let's say you're 43 years old. You make $120,000 a year. After taxes, you're taking home about $84,000. If your fixed costs, just your mortgage, cars, insurance, utilities, subscriptions, all the stuff you can't easily cut, if that's eating up $60,000, you've got $24,000 left for everything else. That's $2,000 a month for groceries, gas, clothes, entertainment, unexpected expenses, and trying to save something. It's tight. You're constantly making trade-offs. One bad month and you're behind. Now imagine you made the same $120,000, but your fixed costs were only $40,000. Suddenly you've got $44,000 in discretionary space. That's $3,600 a month. You can save aggressively. You can invest. You can absorb a surprise expense without stress. You can make career moves based on growth instead of desperation. Same income, completely different life. The difference is the decisions you made about cars and housing 3 years ago. This brings me to the 401k problem. Vanguard publishes data every year on retirement savings. The median 401k balance for people in their 40s is around $150,000. Now, some people have way more and some have way less, but that's the middle. And most Americans, when you ask them, say they think they need something like 1.26 million to retire comfortably. So there's a gap, a big one. And here's the uncomfortable question. What closes that gap? It's not stock picking. It's not crypto. It's not real estate speculation. What closes that gap is boring compound interest math combined with two things, time and contributions. And in your 40s, you're running out of one of those. You've still got time, but not infinite time, which means the contribution part becomes way more important. And the only way to increase contributions is to increase the gap between what you make and what you spend. Let me give you the math on this. If you're 42 and you have 150,000 saved and you want to hit 1.2 million by 67, you need to contribute about $1,200 a month, assuming a 7% real return. That's $14,400 a year. If you're currently saving 5% of an $84,000 take home, that's about $4,200 a year or $350 a month. To get to $1,200 a month, you need to find an extra $850 every month. Where does that come from? Either you earn more, which is hard to control, or you spend less on fixed costs, which is entirely in your control. Now here's where people make a huge mistake. They hit some savings milestone, let's say they get their 401k to 50,000, and they celebrate by buying something big. A boat, a vacation property, some reward for their discipline. And I get it. You worked hard, you want to enjoy it, but here's what you just did. You turned an asset that was working for you into a liability that works against you. That $50,000, if left alone, would grow. But if you pull it out or stop contributing to buy the thing, you reset the compounding clock. And in your 40s, you don't have time for resets. Here's a quick aside. I was at a dinner party once, and this guy, mid-40s, very proudly told everyone he just bought a boat. $40,000. He said he deserved it after years of grinding, and everyone nodded along. But I did the math in my head. $40,000 invested at 7% for 20 years is about $155,000. He didn't buy a boat. He sold $155,000 of his future to rent a boat for a decade. Now, maybe that's worth it to him. I'm not here to judge, but I don't think he thought of it that way. I think he thought he was spending $40,000. He wasn't. He was spending the entire future value of that capital. That's the invisible cost of every purchase, the shadow price. Let me tell you what actually happens to people who get this right. They enter their 50s with options. They're not rich, necessarily, but they're calm. They don't flinch when the car needs a repair. They don't panic when their industry shifts. They can afford to take a lower paying job if it offers better quality of life because their life doesn't require maximum income to function. They can help their kids without wrecking their own retirement. They sleep better. They make better decisions because they're not operating from a scarcity mindset. And ironically, that calmness often leads to better career outcomes anyway, because they negotiate from strength instead of fear. It's a positive feedback loop. Margin creates confidence. Confidence creates better decisions. Better decisions create more margin. So what do you actually do with this information? Let me give you 3 things that matter more than anything else in your 40s. First, know your fixed cost percentage. Add up everything you have to pay every month. Mortgage, car payments, insurance, utilities, subscriptions you can't easily cancel, minimum debt payments, all of it. Divide that by your monthly take home. If that number is over 60%, you're in the danger zone. Every percentage point you can shave off that number is a percentage point of optionality you're buying back. Second, stop financing depreciating assets. If it loses value and you're paying interest on it, you're getting destroyed from both directions. The car is worth less every year and you're paying the bank for the privilege of losing money. Buy used. Buy with cash. Drive it until the wheels fall off. This one decision can free up thousands of dollars a year that can go toward actually building wealth instead of servicing debt. Third, build 6 months of expenses in cash before you do anything else. I know that sounds boring. I know index funds have better returns, but the psychological return on an emergency fund is infinite. It's the difference between operating from scarcity and operating from abundance. And once you have it, protect it. Don't use it for vacations. Don't use it to buy things. It exists for one purpose: to keep your brain out of panic mode so you can think clearly. Here's what nobody tells you. The game in your 40s isn't about getting rich. It's about reducing your fragility. Every financial decision you make should be evaluated through one lens. Does this make me more resilient or more exposed? Does this increase my optionality or decrease it? A bigger house might feel like success, but if it requires both incomes at maximum capacity just to stay current, it's actually increasing your fragility. A nicer car might feel like you've made it, but if it comes with a 7-year loan, it's a 7-year obligation that reduces your ability to pivot when opportunity or crisis shows up. I've spent a lot of time around people who built real wealth, not lottery winner wealth, not inheritance wealth, the kind of wealth that comes from decades of compounding and smart decisions. And here's what's consistent among all of them. They have low fixed costs relative to their income. Not because they're cheap, but because they understood early that margin is more valuable than appearance. They'd rather have options than status. They'd rather sleep well than drive well. And by their 50s, that choice has compounded into a completely different quality of life. Look, I get that changing course in your 40s is hard. You've got commitments. You've got kids in schools. You've got a career that's maybe finally hitting its stride. You've got a life that's built around certain assumptions. But here's the thing. If you don't make changes now, your 50s will make the changes for you. And it's a lot less pleasant when circumstances force your hand than when you choose deliberately. The fork in the road is right in front of you. One path leads to a future where you're calm. The other leads to a future where you're stressed. And the difference is almost entirely about the decisions you make right now about your monthly overhead. Your 40s aren't the end of the story. They're not even the climax. They're the chapter where you decide what kind of ending you're building toward. And most people sleepwalk through this chapter following the script everyone else follows. Bigger house, nicer cars, more stuff. But that script was written by people trying to sell you things, not by people trying to make you comfortable. So maybe it's time to write your own script. One where margin matters more than appearances, where optionality matters more than status, where the goal isn't to look successful, it's to be free. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto memes, and margin beats income every single time.